Hey, y'all, it's your legal bestie, attorney Simone, and I keep getting the question of, do I think that Gina is going to have to go to jail? Is Gina going to be prosecuted by the government after writing that goofy little letter that she submitted in support of bail for Diddy? And the answer is no. I don't think she's going to see the inside of a jail cell. And here's why. I'm going to break it down. There's two main reasons. I'm your legal bestie, attorney Simone. I break down legal cases like I do for my homegirls as though they're drunk at brunch. I do it here on my YouTube channel, which is called Girl, Is That Legal? And I also do it on Instagram at attorney Simone Redwine and TikTok at Girl, at Is That Legal? Now, first off, we got to start with this goofy little letter. Now, I know many people have shared the letter that Gina has submitted, but there's a few important highlights. So, in effect, Gina, who was victim number 3, she was so important that they were going to allow her to proceed anonymously just to get her to testify, submitted this letter to the court. I'm going to read 2 significant little excerpts. She says, quote, I acknowledge and respect that Mr. Combs stands accused and that the court must weigh public safety and the integrity of the legal process. She says, our relationship, like many, was not always perfect. We experienced ups and downs and mistakes were made, but he was willing to acknowledge his mistakes and make better decisions in the future. Over the years that followed, meaning after their relationship, she says, he made visible efforts to become a better person and to address the harm that he had caused. By the time our relationship ended, and we don't know when that was, note, she doesn't say in this so-called letter from her when exactly that relationship ended, but she does say when it ended, he embodied an energy of love, patience, and gentleness that was markedly different from his past behavior, i.e., violence. And to my knowledge, he's not been violent for many years, and he has been committed to being a father first. In other words, I don't know nothing that Jane is talking about, y'all. I don't know nothing about that. She says, I do not view him as a danger to the community. This is his first criminal case. She says, and throughout the investigation and the proceedings, he has been cooperative, respectful, and compliant. Y'all, that means throughout the process, she was in communications with him. Or perhaps she didn't write this at all. Perhaps this was written by an attorney who was in communications with him and know him. So the first way in which Gina could be subjected to jail time would be, number 1, lying to a federal officer. That's actually what Martha Stewart spent time in jail for. Not jail, but prison, federal prison. And guess what? Martha Stewart was prosecuted by the exact same court that this Diddy trial is in. It was the Southern District of New York. Owen, who was the prosecutor that sent Martha Stewart to jail for 5 months? That was her sentence, for 5 months in federal prison for lying to a federal officer. James Comey, Maureen Comey's pappy, her daddy. Now we know Maureen is now long gone. She has, she's been laid off, fired for nothing, just like any other overqualified Black lady. But that's another story. Maureen's gone. But what we do have here, interestingly, is the risk, right, that potentially she could be in trouble for lying to a federal officer. But how that works under the law is that here, the lie would have either been something that she told a federal officer during the investigations when she sat down and they asked her about the facts in her story, or it could have been when she sat down with a grand jury. Now, I'll talk about the grand jury secondly. But the way that this one was written, it was very much, in my opinion, it was very much after our relationship. It was very much her saying her knowledge or impression of him personally. You cannot be prosecuted for your personal opinions. That's also why I don't believe Gina wrote this. First of all, I don't see her signature. It's also not notarized. It doesn't have to be notarized, but it's more than likely this was actually written by an attorney who looked over her grand jury testimony and or sat with her, went in with her when she sat down and told the feds whatever facts she was going to tell. I sat in the courtroom daily during the Diddy trial. And during that trial, I heard each witness talk about going and sitting down with federal officers with their attorney. That's absolutely standard. You don't do that by yourself. So it was likely whatever attorney was there with her probably either helped her write this or reviewed it. She didn't write it. I am 99% sure it was written by an attorney of some sort. But first, they won't be able to get her based on lying to a federal officer for the reasons that I just described. Now, the second question is, well, what about perjury? So if she's on the hook for perjury, then that would have to be her grand jury testimony. Because keep in mind, perjury is only when you give a statement under oath that's untrue. So this letter itself, if this letter was 100% lies, it still couldn't be perjury because this letter is not a statement under oath. Now, what is a statement under oath that we know Gina likely made, or Gina did make rather, is sitting down in front of the grand jury. So with the grand jury, Cassie and Jane and each of the named victims went before the grand jury and testified as to what they experienced. So, but here, this letter, the way it was craftily written, doesn't contradict anything that she may have said with the in front of the grand jury, because as you see here, this letter is her opinion. This letter is about what happened after their relationship to her knowledge. And using key phrasing like "to my knowledge" leaves room for you to be wrong. And last, and certainly not least, most importantly, guys, is that they can't get her for failure to show up to court because the court never gave her a subpoena. See, one of the ways that people get in big, big trouble for not showing up to a trial is if they are first subpoenaed and then they do not show. Because a subpoena is signed by the judge, so it's a court order. Failure to abide by a court order is absolutely a crime. And what happens is the judge, the prosecutor can then go to the judge and say, "Your Honor, we issued a subpoena to Gina. Gina did not show. The subpoena was served to her on this date. The subpoena stated that she was supposed to come here and be available to testify for the time window of this date to this date. She did not comply. And we are now asking that you hold a hearing to, quote, show cause as to make her come to the court and explain to the court why she did not show to trial." But that can only happen if a subpoena was issued. How do I know a subpoena wasn't issued? Well, because I was there at trial. And at trial, what you notice, or you may not notice if you weren't there, but each of the key witnesses, and the key witnesses here were Cassie, Jane, and Gina. Each of them were not there via subpoena. Under oath, Cassie was asked, "Are you here via subpoena?" She said, "No." They said, "Well, why are you here?" She said, "Because I want to tell my story. I want to tell the truth." Same thing for Jane. Jane was not there under a subpoena. And here's why. You never, ever want to force your key witness to testify if they don't want to. Because if you do that, you run the risk that they're going to show up and do what Miss Thing did here. You run the risk that Gina is going to show up here and say, "Oh, I don't know what you guys are talking about. He was a great boyfriend. He was a millionaire. He was amazing. Oh, yeah, by the way, don't forget, I'm attorney Simone, and you can go to my website, SimoneRedwine.com, to book a consult with me at any time, anywhere in the nation. SimoneRedwine.com. It's in my little bio below. But most importantly here, they never subpoenaed Gina. How do we know? Because in court, they never referenced it. Here's how it works when you actually have subpoenaed someone that's no showing. In court, one of the prosecutors will say, well, because one of the things that the judge asked, they said, "Well, what about victim number 3? Is she coming?" And they said, for the first 2 weeks, they were like, "Well, we've been reaching out. We're trying. We've been reaching out to her attorney. Her attorney is going through some personal things, and we're having trouble getting in touch." No, baby. That lady is sick of y'all. She is not going to participate. That's what it was. Whereas if there was actually a subpoena, then what would happen is Maureen Comey would say, "Your Honor, we subpoenaed her. The subpoena was served on such and such date. She is to show to court between these dates. If she does not show, Your Honor, we ask that you hold her in contempt. That's it. That's how the conversation works. But when you haven't subpoenaed someone, they can't be punished. There's nothing to hold them in contempt for because a judge has not ordered her to show up. Because a judge never ordered her to show on any given day, it was always her choice. And her lawyer, which was likely paid for by Diddy, because throughout the trial, multiple witnesses, number one, Jane's lawyer was paid for by Diddy. Jane testified to that. And multiple witnesses discussed that Diddy was willing to, Diddy and Diddy's team were willing to pay for their lawyer and offered. Mia stated that. Even Chef Jordan stated that on one of her social media posts. So likely Gina had an attorney. And if I were her lawyer and she told me she had cold feet and she says, Attorney Simone, Legal Bestie, do I have to testify? The truth of the matter is no, baby girl, you don't. You have not been subpoenaed. As a result, you don't have to show. It's going to throw off their case, but there's nothing that they can do to you if you don't show up. And that's the truth. So whether she chose not to do it based on threats, and there's no evidence that Diddy or Diddy's team threatened Gina in any way with respect to testifying. So I'm just putting that out there. Or whether she said, I don't want to risk it. I don't want to do it because I have a kid and I want my privacy. Or whether she said, I don't want to do it because I don't want to support this case because I think the case is bogus. Any of those reasons are perfectly valid. She cannot be prosecuted under the law based on those two theories, right? The first theory being whether she straight up lied, whether she lied to the feds, or whether she lied to the grand jury. And then secondly, as a result of them not subpoenaing her for trial, she has not committed any contemptuous offense, any offense where a judge could order her into the court and then jail her for not showing. And let me also be clear of one final thing. She was subpoenaed to the grand jury. In fact, multiple people were. Cassie was subpoenaed to speak to the grand jury and tell her story. Jane also testified that Jane was subpoenaed to the grand jury. But I want to clarify, that's a distinction. If you're subpoenaed to show up in front of the grand jury, then that's a subpoena just for that. It's going to have those dates on it. It's going to have that location. It's going to be specific to that. But that does not carry over to trial. If they want you to show up at trial, they must subpoena you. And either the state or the defense can subpoena someone to show up. Absolutely. And last and finally, not least, the same way that Gina was not subpoenaed, neither was KK. That is why we never saw KK. If you watch my prior videos, I touched on that, but we never saw KK because they did not subpoena her. The government did not subpoena her because she never agreed to come and sit down with her lawyer to tell what she knew. Because she did not, quote, self-snitch, right? She didn't sit down and tell everything with that lawyer. The government had no idea what she was going to say. And you never, ever put someone on the stand without knowing the answers to each of their questions, because that is the fastest, quickest way to kill your case. In fact, Alexandra Shapiro, one of Diddy's attorneys, did an interview this past week on Law and Crime with Jesse Weber, who I love, in which Jesse asked her the wonderful question of why didn't the government call KK? She said, Diddy's lawyer, Alexandra Shapiro, said, well, because I think they didn't call her because it would be a double-edged sword. They wouldn't know what she was going to say. Boom. The reason they wouldn't know is because they never talked to her. And it was absolutely her attorney's right to say, no, government, we don't want to sit down with you. We're not under that indictment. We don't have to, and you can't make us. And that is the truth. You can subpoena someone to show up to court, but you cannot force a witness to speak with you in an investigation prior to trial. You can only force them onto the stand. And if you have a good lawyer, that lawyer knows, ain't nobody about to do that. Nobody's about to force you to take the stand when they don't know what you're going to say. So that was actually brilliant lawyering on the part of Diddy's team. It's risky because there's always a risk that she would want to cooperate to lessen any likelihood that she would be tried. But at this point, it appears any indictment that may name her appears to still be sealed. And also remember, her lawyer, KK's lawyer, is Teeny Garagos, same lawyer as Diddy. So they know what's up. All right, I'm your legal bestie, Attorney Simone. Drop your questions below. Hit that like and hit that subscribe. Let's see if by the end of the year, we can get to 100,000 subscribers. Have a great day, y'all.